All right, we're going to go into the message this morning. We are going to be wrapping up our series, Rhythms, Sacred Practices That Renew the Soul. We've been talking about how rhythm is this thing that, especially in music, operates according to a certain set of rules. There's this regularity and a pattern to rhythm. And the interesting thing about rhythm is you can have rhythm, you can have a beat without a melody, but you cannot have a melody without rhythm. And when you are in alignment with the rhythm, whether you're in alignment by playing an instrument or you're in alignment by singing or even dancing, when you are in alignment with the rhythm, you are able to participate in the melody. In a similar way, it seems that the spiritual life, the inner life, operates according to a certain set of rules and patterns, and that when we bring our lives into alignment with those rhythms, we're able to participate in the melody of the kingdom. And so we've identified in our faith tradition, sometimes they call it spiritual disciplines or Christian practices or habits. We're calling them rhythms, but our tradition, our faith tradition, has identified these practices that we can do to participate and pursue abiding in God's presence. So the first week we talked about solitude. Talked about how sometimes we need to intentionally disengage from all of the distractions and chaos and all of the stuff in our life that seems even to numb ourselves to our deeper longings for God, that we actually need to retreat from that stuff and intentionally pursue God's presence in solitude. And then we talked the next week about prayer, about talking to God and listening to God, about how prayer is actually communicating with God. Last week I talked about how those first 2 weeks were these interpersonal kind of private disciplines, and we were going to turn a corner and look at some practices or rhythms that were more outward or others focused. And last week we talked about hospitality, which most literally means love of strangers. We talked about how we could cultivate a hospitality of heart, where people could be welcomed and belonged and safe in relationship with us. Then we talked about if you wanted to challenge yourself. For some of us, this might be a big step, but we could actually practice hospitality by inviting people that you've never had and not maybe necessarily even family or friends, but you could actually invite people into your home. And we talked about practicing hospitality as a church, being a welcoming place. One of the things I love finding is, one of the things I find really beautiful too, is when psychology and sociology, through research and things, actually affirm things that our faith and Scripture and our sense of what is true has believed for a really long time. And the thing is secular psychology and sociology, they would call it different things. Like they may call it mindfulness or meditation, or it would even affirm solitude or hospitality. Sociology and psychology would say these things are actually good for your well-being. That when we practice certain things, we're more likely to be happy and less likely depressed. We're more likely to feel connection and less likely to be isolated. We're more likely to be healthy and less likely to be burdened and plagued by illnesses from stress and things. And I think sometimes we can look at this and see, and there's a narrative that, see, you can practice these things apart from a Jesus worldview. What I see actually is no, psychology and sociology, the sciences are discovering this is God's world and He wired us this way. And so, of course, these things are good for humanity's well-being. You were created in the image of God. You were created for this. Well, this morning, we're going to talk about generosity. And interestingly enough, there was some research done out of Notre Dame, shout out, by sociologists Christian Smith and Hillary Davidson. They did research on the effects of generosity. And they published their findings in 2014 in a book called The Paradox of Generosity. They researched and surveyed 2,000 individuals over a 5-year period, and they interviewed and tracked the financial and lifestyle habits of 40 different families from all across the socioeconomic, racial, ethnic, demographic, and across 12 different states. And if you remember, last week I talked about in research the correlation and causation. A lot of times research tries to discover, is there a causation relationship here? Does this cause this? Or if it can't fully prove or definitively prove that, it says there's a correlation, there's a relationship here. Well, what this research found is that there is a direct causal relationship between generosity with your time, money, and relationships and personal happiness and well-being. The research showed that Americans were more likely to describe themselves as happy if they volunteered an average of 5.8 hours a month versus those who said they were unhappy and only volunteered for 0.6 hours a month. It was also found that there was lower depression rate among Americans who gave more than 10% of their income, and it was found that Americans who were hospitable and caring and generous in their relationships with other people were more likely to be in excellent health than those who were not. The most interesting thing I found from this research was that generosity was something they said has to be practiced with regularity, there needed to be a pattern or a rhythm of generosity. In an interview, one of the researchers and author, Christian Smith, says this: it has to be a practice. It has to be something that is sustained over time, that people engage in with regularity. One-off things just don't affect us that much. Whereas things that we repeat, things that are sustained in our bodily behaviors, you'll often hear me say we are embodied souls. Things we sustain in our bodily behaviors and in our minds have tremendous effects on us. The empirical evidence was very clear. Nothing we tested where you just do it one time has an effect, but all the things that you have to sustain over time have that effect. And in their book, The Paradox of Generosity, Christian Smith and Hilary Davidson write, generosity is paradoxical. Those who give receive back in return. By spending ourselves for others' well-being, we enhance our own standing. In letting go of some of what we own, we ourselves move toward flourishing. This is not only a philosophical or religious teaching, it is a sociological fact. In failing to care for others, we do not properly take care of ourselves. One of the rhythms that will renew your soul is a rhythm and practice of generosity. And this is not only a faith or religious proclamation. According to the research-based evidence, it is a sociological fact. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to speak to what is sometimes an elephant in the room. Because anytime the church or a Christian leader in representing the church talks about generosity and giving, it usually goes to the end goal of you giving to us. And I want to be honest and transparent with you for a few minutes. Here's the reality. We are a nonprofit organization. Everything we do, our ministries, the events, our programs, our staff, the utilities, everything we do is made possible by the faithful contributions of this congregation. We couldn't even keep the lights on if it were not for the financial partnerships of this community of believers. And I'll also be upfront with you and tell you that I do believe that it is important for your discipleship that you give to the community of believers of which you are a part, of the community that you say, this is my church family. And I would say I do believe there is biblical precedent to even say it is a step of obedience. I think a biblical case can be made that it is important to give to your church. Now, all that said, it could be because I'm a millennial or I just tend to be naturally a little bit more jaded. Listen, I get it if you're suspicious of giving to the church. I understand it. I understand if talking about giving and the end goal goes to you give your money to this church is the end of this message. I can understand how that would be a little bit self-seeking or seem a little self-seeking. And so I just want to say to you, it's not why I'm talking to you about generosity and the rhythm of generosity this morning. So if that's an issue, that's an obstacle or hurdle for you, I'm not going to tell you not to give to the church, okay? I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that's not where this message is going, okay? I'm talking about generosity because I genuinely believe if you practice a posture and a heart and cultivate a rhythm of generosity in your life, I genuinely believe you will look more like our generous God. And I genuinely believe that when we look more like the God in whose image we are created, when we look and live in alignment with how God designed us, I believe it really is life-giving. So we're talking about generosity this morning because I genuinely believe generosity will bring fulfillment into your life. It will renew your soul. And so I want to talk to you this morning. We're going to talk about contentment and stewardship and then generosity. Because I believe they all kind of work together, that they build upon each other, contentment and stewardship and generosity. And to help us look at that, I want to look at a text in Scripture. We're going to look at 1 Timothy. If you have your Bibles, I invite you to turn there, or devices, I invite you to go there. Or you can listen along if you want. If you don't want to turn there or pull up your phone, that's fine too. I'm going to be reading from the New Living Translation. We're going to be looking at 1 Timothy. A little bit about Timothy. Timothy was a young Christian man who was born to a Jewish mother and a Greek father. And Paul met him on one of his missionary journeys in Lystra. And Timothy became one of Paul's mentees. He was mentored by Paul and then became a ministry companion of Paul. And later on in their ministry, Paul would send Timothy to pastor the church Paul planted at Ephesus. So we have in our book, or in our Bible, is the book of Ephesians. That's a church at Ephesus. Timothy was the pastor of the church at Ephesus. And the books in our Bible that we have is 1st and 2nd Timothy are sometimes called the pastoral epistles. They're pastoral letters. When Paul wrote to Corinth, there are Corinthians. Those are letters to the whole congregation. But Timothy, the books of 1st and 2nd Timothy, are letters that Paul wrote specifically to Timothy, giving him pastoral instruction. So we're going to look at 1 Timothy chapter 6, beginning in verse 6. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Yet, true godliness with contentment itself is itself great wealth. After all, we brought nothing with us when we came into the world, and we can't take anything with us when we leave. So, if we have enough food and clothing, let us be content. But people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And some people, craving money, have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. We're going to go down to verse 17 if you're following along. Teach those who are rich in this world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God, who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasure as a good foundation for the future, so that they may experience true life. Contentment. True godliness with contentment is itself great wealth. We are immersed in an affluent culture, and our economy thrives on us, on you and I, the consumer, having an insatiable desire for more. With the advent of several different technologies throughout human history, modern human societies evolved from primarily agrarian cultures where the livelihood and economies were mostly based in farming. They evolved into industrial societies where goods could be massively produced. And with the mass production of goods came the mass marketing of goods. It went from you getting in your home these mail order catalogs to you having targeted ads on your social media feed that have been generated by complex algorithms that have been mining information from your Google searches. You are bombarded. We are bombarded with messages every day that say, you need this. You would look great in this dress. Were you searching about cooking? Have you seen this new grill? Your vehicle, the year, make, and model is a status symbol. You matter if you drive this car. You know, happiness is just a click away. Your golf game would be improved if you got this club that has been scientifically engineered to hit the ball faster and farther. And then with Amazon, it will be there in 2 days, right at your doorstep. Which I'm just going to confess. Confession's good for the soul. I do enjoy. There is something, and it's because it releases dopamine. There's a whole science behind it. But getting the box at your door when you've ordered something from Amazon, it's like a mini Christmas day every time. And here's the thing. Credit cards and Amazon, the dangerous side of this is it has sort of encultured us and enabled us to pretty consistently give into our impulse. By and large, Americans spend more money than they make, with nearly 50% of Americans having some degree of credit card debt. And here's the thing. Maybe you're hearing this whole message like money won't make you happy, and maybe the truth is you struggle to make ends meet, like you struggle to have enough, and you're thinking, look, money may not make you happy, but could I just find out for myself? Like, just a little bit more. I'm pretty sure, and to be fair, yes, like research has shown that reaching a certain point of stability does bring a degree of, it relieves a degree of stress and strife in your life, which can lead to happiness and well-being. But what's interesting is there's like, it plateaus. Like there is a point where making more and getting more and having more stuff does not increase happiness. There's like a law of diminishing returns. There's a certain point, that happy medium is like around $75,000 a year. But people who make way more than that, people who are way wealthier than that, they are not necessarily happier. In fact, sometimes they're the opposite. They're significantly less happy. See, the answer Paul says is contentment. That if we are able to be content with what we have, that if we have what we need, we should seek contentment. Contentment says, I have enough. Now, that does not mean you cannot enjoy blessings. That does not mean you cannot shop. Don't want you to feel guilty this week if you're on Amazon and like go to buy something, you're like, oh no, talked about it Sunday. What it means is that if you can cultivate a posture of enough in your heart, it's a way to guard against your affections being enslaved by money. See, Paul does not say money is the root of all evil. Sometimes we misquote that. He says the love of money, when our affections have been captivated and enslaved by money. That is the root of all kinds of evil. And contentment is a way to guard against money enslaving our hearts. The interesting thing about all of our attachments and addictions is that they promise freedom. But whether it is a substance or it is a credit card, in the end, our idols always become our masters. The rhythm of generosity begins with contentment of heart. But watch this. Contentment of heart is sustained by a rhythm of generosity. Generosity is a way to guard against our hearts being enslaved by consumerism and the love of money. And contentment frees us to be generous. There is a correlation between contentment and generosity. Contentment says, I have enough. Stewardship. Paul goes on, he says, teach those who are rich in the world not to be proud and not to trust in their money, which is so unreliable. Their trust should be in God. It's God who richly gives us all we need for our enjoyment. Tell them to use their money to do good. Paul says it's God who richly blesses us. This is echoing in Deuteronomy 8:17 through 18, an Old Testament passage. Says, you may say to yourself, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. It is God who gives you the strength to build wealth. It is God who has enabled the strength of your hands to do what you are able to do. It is God who actually owns everything. God owns everything in the universe. It's not ours. The cultural narrative says, you've earned it. It's yours. You deserve it. And what's interesting, too, is there also seems to be this cultural narrative that the wealthier you are, the more successful you are. It's sort of this unspoken thing that I think we tend to believe is that if you are wealthy, well, you must be successful, and you must be talented, and you must be competent, and you must be skilled, and you must be hardworking. So being wealthy is sort of a sign of these three American virtues of competence and success and hard work. The dangerous thing is sometimes by implication the opposite is true. If you're not wealthy, we don't say this out loud, but I think sometimes we can tend to believe it, especially if we look at people who are lower on the economic ladder than us. Because when we compare, we always look down, right? That, well, if you're not wealthy, it's because maybe you're not competent or successful or hardworking enough. And before long, we can begin viewing people who are created in the image of God through a lens of their net worth. And that's where we begin putting a dollar amount on a human life. See, the danger of this narrative, too, is that our identities can become enslaved to the pride of our success or the shame of our failure. That's the dangerous thing, is it goes both ways. Is that when we operate according to this narrative, then we can link our identities to the pride of our success. We matter because we're successful. But then if something goes south, if something happens, especially it's out of your control, well, now your identity is linked to the shame of your failure, and so your sense of self-worth goes down with it. There's research that indicates that the wealthiest, like the top tier people in our societies, like the top 2%, are sometimes the people who are the rudest on the road, the most impatient in the lines at the stores or the coffee shops, and are a lot of times narcissistic. My sister worked at a Starbucks in Noblesville area, and if you know about that area, it is a well-to-do, wealthy part of Indianapolis. And there's one particular man she shared with, is after she was young, out of college, but there's a gentleman, he was a regular. He wasn't really a gentleman, though. There's a man who was a regular to the Starbucks. He was apparently an important, successful businessman, and he thought, there were several times it seemed, where he thought he deserved, this was before you could use the app to order ahead, he thought he deserved to have his drink made before the other people who were in line before him. Like, he was important and he had things to do. He was a successful man. He deserved his drink before the other peasants in line. And he was kind of rude. Hear me. Success, hard work, competence, these are good things. They're not bad. But don't let success be a doorway to pride. Don't forget that it is God who gives you the ability. It is God who richly blesses. The cultural narrative says, it's mine. I've earned it. I deserved it. Stewardship says, it's God's. I'm a manager of God's blessings. It's sort of like if creation were God's house and he gave you the keys to house sit for a while. What condition is he going to find it in when he comes back? How have you managed what God has given you? How have you used the resources that God has entrusted to you. There's this principle that Jesus teaches in Luke 16, verses 10 through 12. He says, if you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. If you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the true riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? See, being a steward of what God has given you is something you can practice whether you have been given little or much. And there does seem to be this principle that if you are faithful with little, God is able to entrust you with more. Jesus says, to whom much is given, he says this in Luke 12, I think, to whom much is given, much is required. Or the good old Spider-Man quote, with great power comes great responsibility. If you have little, be a good steward of little. If you have much, God may require and expect you to be faithful with the much you have. Contentment says, I have enough. Stewardship says, I am a manager of God's blessings. They're His. Generosity. Paul goes on and says, tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need. Always be ready to share with others. By doing this, they will be storing up their treasures as a good foundation for the future so that they may experience true life. Contentment says, I have enough. Stewardship says, I'm a manager of God's blessings. Contentment says, or generosity says, I'm blessed to be a blessing. I'm blessed to be a blessing. God's heart is generous. And when we are generous with our time, when we have time for people, when we slow down and communicate that people matter, when we are generous with our talents or our gifts, when we help that single mother fix her washer, or we help with that person whose car is broken down, or we maybe use our gifts even to participate in facilitating the worship of a community of believers, when we're generous with our resources, when we help give to build the kingdom, we reflect God's generous heart. We look like God. And when we are generous, we lay the groundwork, Paul says, this foundation for the experience of true life. The NIV says it this way, for the life that is truly life. Or I think Jesus calls it abundant life. When we're generous, it lays the groundwork for experiencing fullness of life. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, Paul writes to the Corinthian church about giving. For some reason, perhaps because there was a famine in AD 45, a severe famine in AD 45 and 63, or for other possible reasons, the Jewish Christians at Jerusalem had come under significant need. Like they were in desperate need. And Paul sees this opportunity, and he sees it as an opportunity to live out what it means to be the church. And he sees it also as an opportunity to show the unity between the Gentile believers and the Jewish believers. So Paul invites and calls on the Gentile congregations that he had planted to take up a collection to take to Jerusalem. Paul writes about this in his letter to the Romans, his letter to Galatians, and his letter to the Corinthians. And in chapter 9 of 2 Corinthians, Paul is writing to them, and he's writing about this collection that he is taking, gathering among all these Gentile churches to take back to Jerusalem. In 2 Corinthians 9, verse 6, he says this, remember, a farmer who plants only a few seeds will get a small crop, but the one who plants generously will get a generous crop. You must each decide in your heart how much to give. And don't give reluctantly or in response to pressure. I'll say, don't give out of a sense of obligation. For God loves a person who gives cheerfully. And God will generously provide all you need. I want to pause here because I think there's a temptation here. I think sometimes what we're going to read next people take and they develop a sort of a prosperity formula. Like if you are generous, God's going to make you rich. And it's a formula, and you do it this way, and it's guaranteed going to make you rich. But then I think in sort of the opposite happens too. We read these texts, and people who want to avoid or like allergic to the prosperity gospel, they say, well, no, this is talking about spiritual realities. And I think if we read this, I think neither fully capture the truth. There's something here where it does seem, yes, God's going to bless you and enrich you in your spirit, but it also seems God is talking about, or Paul is saying God is talking about taking care of your actual material needs. And so this isn't a formula, but it does seem like there is a correlation between generosity and God's blessing. Paul goes on to says, God, verse 8, God will generously provide all you need. Then you will always have everything you need and plenty left over to share with others. As the scriptures say, they share freely and give generously to the poor. Their good deeds will be remembered forever. For God is the one who provides seed. There it is again. God is the one who does it. God is the one who provides seed for the farmer and then bread to eat. In the same way, He will provide and increase your resources and then produce a great harvest of generosity in you. Yes, you will be enriched in every way. Enriched in every way. But listen, there's a so that you can always be generous. And when we take your gifts to those who need them, they will thank God. So two things will result from this ministry of giving. The needs of the believers in Jerusalem will be met, and they will joyfully express their thanks to God. Paul says, don't give reluctantly or out of pressure, but give cheerfully. Here's a paradox, I believe, of generosity. You should only give because you want to. But watch this. You will want to because you give. You should only give because you want to. But as you do, you will find that you are being enriched in every way, and you will more and more want to give. It has this reciprocal relationship. So don't give out of pressure. Give because it's overflowing from your heart, but watch out. When we start being generous, I think it has this contagiousness to it, or it begins to fill our lives. And the more you give, the more you will want to. The cultural narrative says, hoard your blessings. Build your kingdom. Live more and more extravagantly and luxuriously. But generosity says, I'm blessed to be a blessing. Contentment says, I have enough. Stewardship says, I am a manager of God's blessings. And generosity says, I am blessed to be a blessing. Now I want to give you a couple practical tips real quick. Make this practical, hopefully for wherever you are this morning, wherever you are in your particular situation. So first, prioritize giving and saving first. Treat giving and saving like you would any other bill. It's not something you do with what you have left over. Decide like giving and saving. And I say saving because saving is one of the ways you steward the resources God has given you so that you have margin to be generous. Treat your giving like a bill. It's a priority. Save like it's a bill. Start small and then incrementally increase it. If you save $10 a week, that's $520 a year. Or if you give just $10 a week, that's $520 a year. Or if $10 a week is even a lot for you and where you're at and your particular financial situation, I just start somewhere, $1. Like start just a rhythm and a practice of, I'm going to save $1, I'm going to give $1. I'm going to save $1 and give $2, whatever it looks like. Start somewhere, start small. Make giving 10% of your income the goal, but again, start somewhere and incrementally increase. So maybe you're only able to give 1% of your income. Start there, and then 2, 3, 4. But make 10% the goal. Make that what you're aiming at. If you hear it and you're like, I grew up in church, the 10% thing, I got that down. I've been doing that for years. I want to encourage you, well, first of all, are you doing that out of obligation or because you've been pressured to, or is it coming from a cheerful place? And then, well, all right, you up for a challenge? Go beyond 10%. What would it look like for you to give more than 10%? Make it a goal to save $1,000 in an emergency fund. Have $1,000 saved up. That way, there's margin when the washer goes out or there's a car repair. This is a goal that you aim for. Spend within your means. And if you need to, cut the non-essentials, streaming services, data plans, new vehicle, eating out, coffee. There are things you can cut that are non-essential that would help you pursue greater financial health. That is part of leading to generosity. The stewardship, generosity is in part about wisely stewarding what God has given you. And then remember, generosity is about a heart posture, not a dollar amount. You can be generous with your money, but you can also be generous with your time and your skills. Time, talent, treasure. So maybe money right now it's hard for you to be generous with. You can have a generous heart with your time and your listening ear and your friendship. Or you can be generous with, hey, you know what? I don't have a lot of money, but I have some skills with my hands, and I can help people with this. All right, some reflection questions. I encourage you, these might be helpful to think about even throughout the week and prayerfully consider what robs you of contentment in your life. What would it look like for you to cultivate contentment? Number 2, how well are you house sitting for God? Are you stewarding His resources in a way that honors Him and builds the kingdom? Are you a good house sitter? Number 3, how could you step up your generosity? Are there ways beyond financial generosity that you could live from a generous heart? What would that look like for you? I want to invite the worship team to come up, and we're going to close this morning. But I genuinely believe, and I'm going to remind you, research, data-backed research says this isn't just a faith claim or a biblical claim. This is a sociological fact. Generosity is directly connected to the flourishing of your life. And I want to suggest to you that it begins with contentment. Being generous begins by being able to say, I have enough. And being able to say, I'm a manager of God's blessing leads to being able to be generous. And then generosity is all about saying, I am blessed to be a blessing. So I invite you, what would that look like in your life?